So, how much gold do you need to safely retire? And what part does it even play? Is it 17 ounces of gold and that's what you need? 100 ounces? 200? How would you even know? Well, we're going to look at how much gold an average person could have, how much gold the average person does have, and then how much gold the average person actually needs. And then, of course, for those of you who already clear this bar, let's figure out how you can send me whatever you have left over. So if you own 1 ounce of gold, you have more than the typical US household. Typical holdings are thought to be around 3/4 of an ounce. Thought to be. Not everyone, of course, announces what they have. Now, we have a sense for total private holdings, but we'll come back to that. We also have a sense for total above ground worldwide. And if we divide that amount evenly, every person on Earth would have 0.84 ounces of gold. So just over that 3/4 of an ounce that I just mentioned. But if we excluded the central bank reserves, well, then it would be 0.67 ounces. So just under that 3/4 of an ounce. But regardless of how we look at it, 1 ounce of gold puts you ahead of the global curve. But if you rely on gold to any extent as a hedge, as insurance, as retirement savings, unfortunately, 1 ounce of gold doesn't get you very far. So how much do you actually need? Well, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you what US households reportedly have on average and how that compares against average needs in retirement. Now that gets to the important stuff, whether or not we have enough and how to figure that out. So quick shout out to channel sponsor Summit Metals. If you're looking for gold and silver, they've got you covered. They're making a lot of updates to their website, so be sure to check them out, summitmetals.com. So let's start this off with how much people need. The average annual retirement spending here in the United States is $60,000 per household. That number is very similar to the average cost of living here, which is $61,334 as of 2025. Now, those numbers being similar, that's going to make our calculations easier, but I just want to say that average cost of living and average retiree spending are two different things. And nothing more that we really have to do on that. I just want to say it out loud so we're all clear. Okay, next up, let's take a look at average savings. We're going to break this out by age group. The average savings range from $49,130 to $462,410. Now remember, averages here will be drawn higher by households at the very top of the pyramid. Median is lower. The median savings of U.S. households range from $18,800 to $130,000. You've noticed by now that I'm using U.S. data. I'm using it because it's consistent and it's easy to verify. Your numbers will be different depending on your circumstances and where you live, but the math is the same anywhere. Costs, savings, potential gaps, those are factors for any of us. So what we're looking for here is a useful comparison and then a way to calculate whether you have enough for your specific case. Now, what we need to get into now is what U.S. households actually hold, reportedly. So less than an ounce, right? Less than this. Well, it depends on how you look at the data. I've mentioned estimates, I've mentioned averages, and I've mentioned medians. Now we need to run some models against how much gold is actually out there. The total private holdings in the United States are estimated to be about 26,000 tons. So evenly distribute that across the U.S. population. That would mean every U.S. household would have 6.4 ounces of gold. And that would look a little bit like this. Now, we know, of course, that gold is not evenly distributed. And it goes against the 3/4 of an ounce estimate that I mentioned for the typical U.S. household earlier. Well, actual ownership is obviously skewed. There are whales swimming in this pool. Just keep that in mind. Now, taking that uneven distribution idea even further, the bottom 80% of households would hold an average of 2.7 ounces. Looks a little bit more like this. Actually, I'm going to need another quarter here, but this is getting pretty close to my 3 ounce amount that I've made a case for in the past. 3 ounces is a strong starting goal for gold holders, in my opinion. That puts you in this first category. Now, the top 20% of gold holders in the US would hold an average of 16 ounces. That's what we're looking at in back here with these buffaloes, 16 ounces of gold. So estimates, medians, averages, and even distributions. That lets us know how much people spend, how much they've saved, and then hypothetically, how much gold there is to go around. It doesn't go around to everybody though, right? Not everybody has gold. You nailed it. A lot of different sources cite the World Gold Council's survey from 2020 saying that 38% of U.S. retail investors own physical gold. Well, just under 60% of U.S. households fall into that retail investor category, so that works out to 23% of all U.S. households potentially holding gold. So let's narrow that distribution. If we only count the 23% of households that the World Gold Council tells us own gold, divide the total private holdings across that group, well, the number now jumps to 28.4 ounces of gold per household. That would be instead of 6.4. Now, we're getting into big numbers here, so let's remember average is different than median. Average is going to be higher, and saying the average gold holder has 28.4 ounces of gold, that would be a huge stretch. That's just the math of even distribution as we narrow this field, but it's at least interesting from a comparison perspective. Okay, let's bring this back to what an average person might actually need. So average annual retirement spending in the United States is $60,000 per household. The average monthly Social Security benefit is $2,006 per month. That's as of July 2025. So $24,000 per year. Now, that leaves a gap of $36,000 of remaining spending needed per year. So we're grossly oversimplifying this case. I get it. Household could have two individuals drawing benefits. It could have none. We're just trying to create a logical baseline figure to demonstrate the math. Now, the formula, that's what's important here, not the figure. Now, that said, average figures are definitely interesting. Half the fun in this is being able to see how you compare to the average Joes and the average Joneses. So let's get into the math here, and then we can come back to the fun. If the average savings at 65 is $600,000, spending is $60,000, 24 of which is covered by benefits, then average Joe can simply burn through his savings, coming up with that remaining $36,000 for 16 years and 8 months, and then check out broke at age 81. Now, all of that assumes that his $600,000 savings was earning enough interest to keep up with inflation. If the savings is earning enough to exceed inflation by that magic 4% amount that we hear about, well, Joe can make it to 94, as long as he keeps his cardio up. Now, up until now, we've been skimming over that inflation part, and that's important because $60,000 annual expense becomes $61,800 the next year, $63,654 the year after that, and so on. So if you want to make it 17 years or 29, you need to stay ahead of inflation. Now, I use gold as savings. I expect it to stay ahead of inflation. I'm going to assume the remaining 23% of the U.S. gold holding households are using it the same way. Now, how much do we need? Well, 10% of your portfolio, that should be gold, right? Well, that's what the pros have said traditionally, 5 to 10%. If it's 5%, average Joe would need $30,000 in gold. That's 8.8 ounces. If it's 10%, he'd need 17.6 ounces, which is about what we have on the desk here. Now, if he went all in 100%, well, he'd need 10 times this amount, 176 ounces of gold, and I would need a bigger desk to demonstrate what that looks like. So remember when I said that average Joe could simply burn down his savings and last about 17 years? I was using average savings and average retiree spending. Came out to 17 years to burn that down. Well, based on the current spot price of gold, that coincidentally also works out to 17 ounces of gold. If average Joe is keeping 10% of his nest egg in gold, so 17 ounces over 17 years. It's kind of a crazy coincidence since I'm not working backwards from any of these numbers. Okay, so average Joe needed 17 ounces of gold to fund 10% of his retirement. It's that last part that's important there. He needed 1 ounce per year. It was interesting, but we're going to get back to figuring it out for our own personal cases. Now, you probably have some idea of your expected retirement spending, at least the minimum cost. You probably also know how much you'll get from Social Security or similar benefits, and then how much you have remaining that's going to have to come from savings. Now, the general advice is that you'll need 70% of your pre retirement income every year to maintain the lifestyle to which you become accustomed. Now, you look at it differently. Fidelity says you should aim to have 10 times your income saved by retirement. There are different ways to do it, but you could also just build a budget around your expected costs. It's going to take more work, but it's probably a lot more accurate. Now, once you know that expected cost, you have your baseline. You need that amount inflation adjusted for as many years as you plan to be around. We're going to be really clear here. I'm no financial advisor, but my own retirement plan is built around having enough principal to cover withdrawals through the interest that it generates. So that'd be similar to the 4% rule from the Trinity study. And then I have a backup plan beyond that if that doesn't work. 2 is 1. 1 is none. So if I'm covered by a 4 or 5% inflation adjusted return, I still want my minimum expenses subsidized by gold holdings. Now, I've gotten to my goal amount for how much gold to have through different math. I don't actually feel that my only use case is in retirement, but the number is the same. 10% of $100,000 in annual expenses from age 65 to 100 still comes to 100 ounces of gold. And if I have 100 ounces of gold, well, I feel like I have enough to retire. Now, I do know by now that giving any number at all is going to get a certain type of comment, but I'm trying to illustrate a point, not tell anyone a figure on how much they have to have themselves. Average Joe needed 17. The average retail investing gold holding household in the US had 28. I like 100. It's the formula, though, here, and I think it's actually pretty universally relevant and realistic. It's realistic because it isn't a total reliance only on gold. I'll never be all in on any one single asset, gold or otherwise, but covering 10% of minimum costs for the maximum time frame with gold seems reasonable. Now, the 35-year time frame, that might be aggressive, but I don't mind being at least a little bit hopeful on that front. At least it's somewhat realistic because I at least know there's no way I'm making it past 100. I have too many vices. I think we can call it good there. So let us know what you think about covering 10% of minimum expected retirement costs with gold holdings, or at least having that amount available. Now, these kind of suggestions, they never work for the full spectrum of needs, but there's a takeaway in there that I think helps with planning for all of us. Let us know what you think, though. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.